to see if anybody else is gonna come in, and then we'll jump in about 30 seconds or so. Wonderful, thank you, Samantha. Um, so we'll give it just a few more seconds. In the meantime, um, if you would like to access the slides for the presentation today, you can use the QR code or the link on the screen, and I'll also put in the chat uh, a bunch of links there as well that you can use to access those resources. Um, and if you're interested, as I said, you can follow along on the slides. I'm going to be looking at a bunch of different resources and tools today. So they are all linked on the slides, so you don't have to worry about going to try to find all of those links. But I do encourage you to, follow along if you're interested, so you can practice using some of the resources as we're going through. So our presentation today is on navigating university libraries resources. So I'm happy that you are here today. Hopefully you will find this session to be helpful. If you do have any questions or comments as I'm going along, please do feel free to add them in the chat. Raise your hand. I'm happy to pause and take questions as we're going through. I'm going to be covering a lot today, but there's still probably things that I won't be able to get to that you might be interested in. So please don't hesitate to go ahead and ask your questions in the chat. I always like to start off by just checking in and seeing how folks are feeling today. And I'm a big cat fan. So I have some different cats up here. If you do feel comfortable sharing in the chat how you're feeling today, if any of these cats match how you're feeling, maybe you're an anxious Abyssinian, a busy Bengal, a hungry Himalayan, a marvelous Maine Coon, a rambunctious Ragdoll, or a sleepy Scottish fold. So if you feel comfortable sharing in the chat how you're feeling today, please feel free to add that in there. Busy Bengal, yep, a couple of busy folks in there, which is totally understandable for graduate professional students. Busy Bengal for sure. Scottish fold, wonderful. Yeah, at this time of day, my answers tend to be either busy, hungry, or sleepy, which all of them are completely and totally understandable at this time of day. So thank you all for sharing how you're feeling today. So again, I wanted to just encourage folks to go ahead and add any questions that you have in to the chat. Anything about navigating the library resources that you would like me to cover today, so that if I don't, have it planned to cover it in my presentation, I still will try to get to that question. So as we're going through, please don't hesitate to put your questions in there so we can get to those. I can't guarantee that I will be able to fully answer every question. There's still a lot of things about the library that I don't know, and I've been here for 5 years. And so, but go ahead and ask them. And if I don't know the answer right away, I will make sure to get to find the answer for you. So my name is Jane Hammons. I am an assistant professor in the university libraries. My title is Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian. And you can email me at hammons.73@osu.edu. And I'll put that link in the chat there as well, so you can access. Send me an email if you have questions, thoughts after the presentation. Happy to talk more with you. So I also have the experience is that I'm also, in addition to being a librarian, I'm also a graduate student myself. So I started last fall a PhD program in the philosophy and history of education. So that's been a unique experience to have sort of both of those perspectives and learn to try to navigate the library as a student again, and not just as, a library faculty member. So hopefully that will give me an interesting perspective as we're going through today, but I do recognize and understand challenges that folks might have with navigating the library. So we're going to talk today about all kinds of resources and services that are available to you as graduate and professional students. I don't expect you to, be familiar with everything. I don't expect you, not everything may be relevant to your particular role, but we're going to talk about a wide range of resources and services and hope that you are able to have an idea of what's out there for you and how you can get help from the library. Database use, finding a specific journal article. Definitely going to talk about that, Tom. Wonderful. So a couple of questions just to kind of get to know where you are. So I would be interested to know, since you started at Ohio State, whether you've checked out a print book or accessed an electronic book or requested a book through interlibrary loan. So if you feel comfortable just noting in the chat, yes, no, or you're not sure, that's okay as well. But since you've been a graduate student at Ohio State, have you checked out a book or accessed an electronic book? Requested a book through interlibrary loan? Yes, wonderful. Yes, yes. A couple of people with yes. Smith with no, which is totally okay. If your response to no is no to any of these, that is totally okay as well. Yes, use ILL multiple times. Wonderful. Great. So second question. Have you located articles to the library? So have you used the library database or have you used one of our online journals to locate an article or multiple articles? Yes, yes, but sometimes I could not find the articles that I was looking for. Wonderful. So we'll talk about what you might do in that situation if you can't find the article that you're looking for, or if you feel like you're not being very efficient with your searches. We can talk more about that for sure. Wonderful. Since you became a professional graduate student, have you used libraries to locate films or TV shows or images or audio? Nope, nope, nope. See, most folks are not familiar with or haven't really used the library for that reason. So we'll talk about how you might be able to use that. Archives for images, wonderful, Tom. Yeah, great. Um, and then have you used any of the library's facilities as a place to study or as a place maybe to write, to work on your research? And this could be Thompson Library or it could be any of the other libraries that we have on campus. Yes, yes, yes. Wonderful. Great. Only for poster printing. Yes, the Research Commons. Wonderful. Yeah. I'm going to talk more about the Research Commons in case other folks are not familiar with what that is. Great. And then the last question to just kind of get us started. So have you contacted a librarian or a library staff member for any type of assistance? So finding an article, finding a book, any kind of questions that you might have. No, 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 not yet. It's okay. No, yes, still waiting for a reply. Okay, wonderful. So great. So all of those things, I shared, to get an idea of your familiarity with library resources, but also to give an idea of the kinds of things that you can do. So if you haven't done any of those things, those are all things that are available to you as graduate and professional students. And I want to talk more a little bit about this last one about talking to a librarian, talking to a library staff member for assistance, because I think that's, something that maybe a lot of folks don't do, but that can be really helpful as part of your research process. So any quick questions or comments that folks would like to share before we move on? So I'm going to share some key takeaways. And I know takeaways normally come at the end of a presentation, but I really wanted to get these toward the beginning of this presentation because these are the next three things I'm going to talk about are the three things that I think I really want you all to take away with most. So the first thing is that you should not be paying for any articles. I don't ever want to hear that a graduate student has either paid their own money for an article or not accessed an article because they thought that they couldn't do it because there was a paywall. So make sure that you are not paying for articles, right? You can access articles through our databases, which we're going to talk about. You can request articles through Article Express, right? You should not be paying for these resources. And that includes, newspaper articles as well. We have access to a wide range of newspapers, the Chronicle of Higher Education, if you're interested in following that. And of course, tons and tons of books, print books, electronic books, all kinds of books. So you really should not be paying for a lot of the resources. Now, there's some exceptions, sometimes textbooks we can't really access. So if you're using textbooks, that could be a challenge. Getting the most up-to-date copies of some of the books that you use for class might be challenging. But for the most part, you should not be paying for many or most of the resources that you're looking for, right? Let us get those and find those. You are paying already for library resources, so you should not be paying another fee to access an article that you need. Does that include the dispatch? Yes. Yes, Tom, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I'll share the newspaper guide that we have at the end that shows you how to access resources through the libraries. Yeah. Right. So, it may be things that you think that you would not have access to. Make sure that you are checking to see whether the library can get that access for you before you are paying for any resource. And for the most part, articles you should not have to be paying for at all. Newspaper access you should not be paying for. Historical newspapers might be a little bit different, but we have historical newspaper archives as well. So that don't pay for things that you don't need to be paying for. The next takeaway is research is complicated. Navigating the library is complicated, right? The university libraries is actually a collection of many different libraries. We have so many resources available. I have been a librarian for 15 years. I have been at Ohio State for more than 5 years now, and there are still things that I don't know about the libraries, things that I may not know how to access just because I've never had to access them in my particular role. And so it's totally okay. It's totally okay if you feel that you don't really know what you're doing, or if you feel like you're being inefficient or ineffective with your searches. That is totally understandable because this is hard. It's hard. So it's okay if you don't know these things. And that's one of the reasons why you're here is to get more familiar with some of these things. But it's also okay if you need to ask questions. It's also okay if you need to reach out to a librarian for help. And that leads to my third point is that librarians and library staff are there to help you. I don't know how many times I've heard in other librarians, we talk about this. We have students who tell us, they come up to us very hesitantly, like, I don't want to bother you, right? But that's what our job is. Our job is to be here to assist the students and faculty and staff of Ohio State to navigate this complex library system, right? So you're not bothering us if you ask us for help. That's the reason why we became librarians. It's because we want to be doing this kind of work, right? So you should never feel like you're being a bother if you're asking for help. This is a natural and accepted part of the research process to ask a librarian for assistance. Right? So those are the 3 key takeaways that I really wanted to share and highlight before we even jump into all of the particulars of navigating the library. So I'll pause there really quickly just to see if there are any questions or comments that folks would like to share. Again, you can share in the chat if you'd like. You can raise your hand if you'd like to do that. I'll pause for just 30 seconds to see if there are any questions or comments. Okay, so in this first section, I just want to highlight a few key library people and library spaces. First, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this, but I did just want to mention that, some of you may be familiar with Thompson Library or the 18th Avenue Library, but we do have multiple other libraries on campus. And, depending on what field you're in, depending on what part of campus you're in, you might find some of these libraries more accessible to you. Sometimes these are places that are quieter, less inhabited than Thompson Library might be. So if you are looking for a place to work, to study, to write, some of these could be great options for you. If you're a comic fan, the Billy Ireland Cartoon Library and Museum, I think, is a place that is sometimes not widely known on campus, but is a fantastic resource, one of the greatest collections of comics that are in the United States. So it's a really great, interesting place to visit if you're looking for a fun place to go. But just wanted to mention that we do have multiple libraries on campus. The 18th Avenue Library is the only one that has 24-hour access some days. So if you are the kind of person that, needs to be working and late at night, that's a good option for you as well. But I just want to highlight that the libraries actually consist of more than Thompson Library and the 18th Avenue Library, in case you weren't familiar with any of those other resources. And then in terms of key people on campus, I really want to highlight the role of subject librarians. So our subject librarians are librarians who work with the students and faculty in specific colleges or departments to handle all kinds of requests. So research and reference assistance, requests for materials. They do a lot of different kinds of work with the students and faculty in their particular colleges and departments. So I did want to give everyone a chance to identify their own subject librarian if you're not familiar with who your subject librarian is. So there's a link in the chat there where you can access the subject librarians, and I'll go out and take a look at that link as well. But take a second. If you're not sure who your subject librarian is, go ahead and look up who that person might be. And if you feel comfortable, put that person's name in the chat so we can see who those librarians are. But you can see here the different kind of subject areas, librarians who are assigned to particular areas. So my graduate program is education. So my subject librarian is Deidre Herring. But I highly encourage you to know who your subject librarian is and not to hesitate to reach out to them if you do have questions or problems, concerns, you're not sure where to go to get started, because that's really a key part of the job of subject librarians is interacting with the students in their areas. Deidre, wonderful. Patricia Verdine's wonderful. Yeah, Patricia just started at the university library, so I know she's eager to talk to students. Absolutely. Jessica Page, wonderful. Samantha. Yeah. So again, keep those people in mind as a resource that is available, a really key resource that's available to you. As you're going through the process of writing a thesis, writing a dissertation, even thinking about going on the job market, these librarians are familiar with research in the field. They're familiar with the resources, and so they're really there to help you. And yeah, go ahead, Tom.
So what's the difference between your job and like Deidre? You said you do teaching and learning, which is part of education.
Yes. So my job is I actually work with faculty from across the university. So I don't have a particular subject area. So I'm in the education department as a graduate student, but that's not my subject area. So Deidre is the subject librarian for education. So my job works with faculty and instructors from across all aspects of the university. I don't have a specific subject area that I specialize in.
I also have a quick question.
Yeah,
So Jessica Page is the librarian for Environment and Natural Resources, which is technically the program I'm in. But I do a lot of research on a lot of psychology research within environment. So should I be referring to two separate librarians if I need help?
Yes, it's absolutely perfectly fine to reach out if there are other librarians, if you're doing interdisciplinary kind of work and other librarians that you think might have expertise that would be helpful to you. Absolutely. You could, include Jessica in on those conversations if you wanted to, or you could reach out to that other librarian directly, depending on what it was. The subject librarians have a listserv where they can email and interact with each other and share questions that they get. So they're totally, open to and willing to working with another librarian, sharing information. So yeah, whatever, you can reach out to as many librarians as you would like.
Awesome. Thank you.
So go ahead and go back to our presentation here. But again, just encourage you to take a look at those. Make sure you're keeping your subject librarians in mind as you're going through and thinking about your, what kinds of assistance that you might need. So we had some questions. Any additional questions and thoughts before we move on to some of the key resources that are out there? So we talked about subject librarians. Another key resource that I want to mention are subject guides. And go back a little bit. So if you haven't accessed one of the subject guides, again, that link should be available there in the chat for you to be able to access those. You can go out to our subject guides and you can see what these are different types of guides that have been put together to help with research in a particular area. What you can do is, if you are in social work, for example, you can go to our social work guide. And you can see here they put together, Cindy is our librarian in this case here. Here are resources for finding articles. Here are resources, how you can do Article Express, films and videos. And these guides are going to look different depending on which librarian you have, what kind of resources they put together. If you're in vet med, for example, you can look at the guide here. So some of these are going to be more detailed than others, but here's how you find reading lists, faculty research impact, evidence-based veterinary services, right? Textbooks. So these all have, are tailored to the specific field guides that the librarian has put together in that area to try to help students get started with research in that particular area. So again, if you go to the education guide, one that Deidre has put together, here's all our guides on finding scholarly articles, citing sources, doing a literature review, finding streaming media, right? So we're trying to put together in one place as many resources as we can to help you know where to go to get started. So if you're not sure which databases to use in your area, if you're not sure which online journals to look at, these are the guides that you can go to get you started. If you're struggling to figure out where to go first, and it will also have the contact information for that librarian in that area as well. So I encourage you to take a look at those subject guides, find those guides that would be most relevant, take a look at those resources on there, and use those as great starting points for your research. So finding databases, finding articles, finding journals. There's a lot of different ways that you can go about finding articles and finding resources that you need. So I'm going to go out to the library website, and I'm just going to show a few different options that you have for searching for resources. So hopefully everyone is seeing the library website page. If you're not seeing the library website page, do let me know. But hopefully that you should all be seeing that. The sort of big broad search tool that you can use is this search bar on the main page. We call this the Discover layer. And what this attempts to do is search across multiple types of resources at once. So you can type in a search. So my work is on faculty development. So that's one of the areas that comes up immediately when I do my search. But you can do a search, and it's going to come up with a wide range of resources if you use that Discover. It's going to come up with things from the library catalog, but it's going to come up with articles. It's going to come up with people. It's going to come up with websites. So it's going to be a wide range of different types of resources that might come up. Personally, the Discover tool doesn't, going to try to say this as politically as possible. Sometimes the Discover tool can be a little unwieldy to use because it is trying to search across so many different resources that it becomes a little bit overwhelming, the number of results that you get. So if you are looking for articles, I recommend either going through the research database list or going through specific journals. So if you want to know what specific databases to search for, you'll see over here on the side, you have this link here where you can go directly to the research databases list. And so this is a place that I recommend going to get started when you're searching for articles. And what you can do is you can see that we have our databases here arranged by subject area. There are a lot of different databases, so it can sometimes be challenging to know which databases to look for. So this way you can use the subject area to get an idea of what databases are relevant in those areas. If you do know the specific database that you're looking for, you can search directly for a specific database using that there. But if you're not sure and you want to give an idea of what databases might be out there in your particular area, so I'll go and do education, teaching and learning, and it pops up with some different databases that are a little bit more focused and has descriptions of those particular databases. So education full text, for example, I could go and search that, education research complete. So to give you some examples of different databases to search. ERIC obviously is a really big education database as well. So it'll give you those examples there that allow you to select different databases that you want to search. So another option, if you want to search for articles, go back here to Library Home again. You have this tab up here where you can search for articles, and that just does a little bit more focused search, where it's searching just for articles instead of trying to search across multiple options. The online journals list is a great resource as well. So this is really helpful if you are looking to see there's a specific journal, you want to know whether or not we have that journal, or if you know that we already have that journal, you know that the article that you're looking for is in a specific journal, you can go directly to that journal and search and then find the article through that journal. So you can search by title. So you can see here, one of the journals that I looked up recently was one called Reference Services Review. So you can put the title in that you're searching for, and it'll pop up and tell you whether or not we have that journal. It'll tell you what years that journal is available. And one of the things you will notice here is that sometimes the journal will be available in different locations depending on the years that you're looking for. So if I was looking for articles from this journal from the 1970s, I would need to use this first link here. If I'm looking for articles that have just recently been published, I need to use this last link here. So you will want to make sure that you're taking a look and noticing what years are available for that particular journal, and make sure that you're looking in the right year section for the article that you're looking for. If you do know specifically which article you are looking for. I tend to use this a lot when I'm looking for articles, because there'll be specific articles. Like if I find an article that I'm looking for, and then I look at the citations and I see I want to read that article and I want to read that article, and I tend to use this as the most effective means to find articles that I already know exist. And when I know that they exist in that particular journal, this for me is the quickest, easiest way to find articles that I know exist. Sorry. There's one other thing I was going to show. I think that was it for now. Let me go back to the home page here. So you have a lot of different options for finding articles. And I think, Tom, you had mentioned earlier, feeling ineffective in searching. And, you know, one of the things is that it is really challenging if you're searching for articles, just because there are so many articles out there. They're going to be in different databases. They're going to be in different journals. And so, it's okay if you sometimes feel ineffective, but you can try those different tools. You have an advanced search option there if you want to use that. And that's the one other thing that I want to mention. So let me go back really quickly so I can just show this really quickly. So we're making sure folks are following. If you don't put anything in the search tool and just click the advanced search there, it will pop up with this option for more search tools. And I often use this EBSCO discovery option here. Because what this does is this searches across multiple EBSCO databases at one time. So, you can search across, it's limiting, but it's also at the same broader than just doing searching one database at a time. So I find that tool to be really helpful. What is EBSCO? Great question, Tom. So EBSCO is one of the most prominent database vendors. So basically, when it comes to research databases, there are hundreds and hundreds of them out there. And there are some companies that provide access to multiple collections of databases. So EBSCO is a company that provides access to dozens and dozens of different types of databases in one kind of service. So you can search each EBSCO database separately, or using that tool, you can search those EBSCO databases, multiple databases at one time. So I know it's a little bit confusing, but so EBSCO is one prominent database vendor. ProQuest is another prominent database vendor. And each of those then have dozens and dozens of different databases that they offer. And so you might hear someone saying, oh, I searched EBSCO. But what they really mean is I searched one EBSCO database, Academic Search Complete, or I searched ERIC, or I searched Education and Research Complete. And those are all EBSCO databases. So it gets a little confusing, but hopefully that helps. But if you need more information on that, just let me know. Does that clarify it?
Yeah, I think where I run into trouble is like going to the online, or sorry, the research database lists.
Mhm.
I don't know what those databases are. Like what if I didn't know, if I were in education, I would have no clue what ERIC is
Right.
So that's kind of where I get confused a lot of times.
Yes. Yeah, and that's going back to those subject guides. That's one of the goals that the subject guides are supposed to do, is to help you identify which are the databases that are most relevant in your particular area. So we'll try to back here. So here's education. So you can see on this education guide, for example, Deidre has here, like, here's an introduction to EBSCO to try to help kind of identify what databases are relevant. Finding scholarly articles here. So here's guide for, like, here's searching in EBSCO. Here are these, databases are the ones that are kind of recommended the most in this particular area. But it is definitely challenging. This idea, I know that you don't want to, like, as I said, you don't want to think I have to search every single one of these separately. So that's where you can use a tool like EBSCO Discovery that allows you to search across all of the EBSCO databases at one time. Log in there. So yeah, so it definitely is confusing. And this is a question too, where if you're not sure which databases to start with, this is something, send an email to your subject librarian. Here's my area, here's the kinds of things I'm researching. Which databases would you recommend? And they should be able to give you a more curated list of the databases that would be most relevant. But it is definitely confusing just because there are hundreds and hundreds of databases out there. And so knowing which one to use can be challenging. Other questions on using the database tools to find articles. Another option, not specifically a library tool, but if you do use Google Scholar, you can have Google Scholar set up so that it will tell you resources that are available through Ohio State libraries. So I'm just going to do a quick search here. And if you have this set up, it'll give you links to how to find and access resources through different databases through Ohio State. So you can create your connection, and it will know then that you're a student at Ohio State, and articles that pop up in Google Scholar, it will pop up with links to those that you can use and access using Ohio State's access. And we do have a guide on how to do that. Put this link in the chat. This link here in the chat should take you to this guide that will show you how to connect Google Scholar to your Ohio State account so that you can find resources available through Ohio State using Google Scholar. All right. Other questions that folks have about finding articles, finding journals, finding databases. So just a few quick mentions of finding other resources, finding books. Again, you can use the main search bar here if you're looking for books. You have your books and more option here where you can search the Ohio State catalog. You can search OhioLink. So OhioLink is basically a connection of libraries across Ohio. And so if you can search just, resources that are at Ohio State using the OSU library catalog. If you want to search across Ohio, you can use OhioLink to search. And then WorldCat allows you to search libraries across the world to look for resources there. So you'll have different articles that you can use to search for books as well. I did want to mention print books and electronic books are both available. Most of the purchasing now is electronic books. We don't tend to buy a lot of print books anymore. We occasionally do. But a lot of the books that you'll find, especially more recent books, are going to be electronic books. Those do sometimes have limits on the number of people that can use an electronic book at one time. Often it's 3 users, sometimes it's just 1. Others do have unlimited use, so it just kind of depends. But the great thing about accessing electronic books is often you can download specific chapters. So if you find a few chapters that are really interesting to you, normally there's a download limit of 60 pages or somewhere around that, but you can download specific chapters and read those, if you want the PDF of a book as well. So finding books, I'm not going to spend a lot of time mentioning these other resources, but I did want to just highlight that if you are looking for dissertations, we have a guide for finding dissertations. ProQuest theses and dissertations is the biggest name to find dissertations that have been published all across the country. So if you're looking for those, you can also find dissertations that have just been published just at Ohio State, if you're looking for that for any reason. I mentioned, finding videos, music, and images. I think that a lot of folks mentioned that they hadn't really used the libraries for that reason. But we do have a wide collection of streaming media and music that's available to you. I'll put those links in there one more time. Get that. And I've been really surprised at the types of resources that are available through streaming media. So you might think, oh, it's just a bunch of like dusty old educational documentaries that no one want to watch. There are really a lot of really great resources in there. One of my favorite TV shows from the last couple of years was the HBO series Chernobyl, for example. And you can access and watch all of the episodes of Chernobyl through our streaming media, through Films on Demand. And so, there's a lot of stuff that you are in there that you might not expect to find in these collections of more kind of educational resources. So if you're looking for streaming media or music, you can definitely take a look at some of these resources, images as well. We have a lot of resources for accessing those resources as well, if you're looking for those. And then we talked briefly about newspapers. I put the link in the chat there to the newspapers guide. So hopefully folks should have that access there. Yeah. And that has a guide there that will tell you how to find a newspaper. So why use newspaper, starting your search, finding that search there. You can see local news. So there's the Dispatch, the Lantern, if you're looking for those. So great tool if you're looking for newspapers for any reason to go about. You can use this guide as a great place to go to get started there. And then citing sources. I know that citing sources can always be a real concern for students, for all students. We do have a couple of citation management guides. So I recommend that you take a look at those if you have questions about getting started. If you're not using any type of citation management software, I would recommend taking a look at the different types of citation management software that are available. Zotero is the one that I've used the most, but we also have RefWorks. EndNote is another different option there. So it has different information on using those citation management tools. What works for you? Different people like different tools and things work best for them. But if you're not using any citation management tool, I do recommend taking a look at some of those, especially as you get into dissertation research. You want some way to really keep track of all of your sources, and those are great tools as well. And then we also just have, citation guides. So if you're not sure how to cite an APA, MLA, we have our citation examples there by style. So you can take a look at those if you need help with citation. And then just a few quick overviews in terms of, how you can access resources. If you check out a book from the library as a graduate or professional student, you should have 17-week checkout period if it's owned by Ohio State. If you check out a book that's not owned by Ohio State, generally it's 3 weeks, but you do often have up to 6 renewals, depending on the library that originally owned it. I did want to mention, if you do have a campus address, if you have a dorm on campus or if you have a campus office, you can have materials delivered directly to your office or to your dorm. So I've got some guidance on there to how to set that up so you can have things delivered directly to you. If you have a question on how to access your account, you can use that account information to see, anything about your own account. I did just want to mention, if you have a Columbus Metropolitan Library card, we have an agreement with the CML that you can request books from the Columbus Metropolitan Library and have those delivered to Thompson Library to pick up. And you can also return your Columbus Metro Library books to Thompson Library. I'm a big CML user myself, so it's always been helpful to be able to just drop off books and pick them up at Thompson Library. So I just want to mention those. And then one last thing here in this section I wanted to mention is that you do have the ability to request materials to be added to the collection. So if there's a book that you need and we don't have it, you can recommend that we buy it. It's not guaranteed. If it's super expensive, rare book, we may not be able to buy it. But for a general, $20, $30, $40 book, they will try to buy that for you. And then they'll send you an email when it's been purchased, so you'll know when it's available. So again, can't guarantee. Textbooks are really challenging to be able to buy for many different reasons. But if there is a book that you would like to have added to the collection, or a video, streaming media, that kind of material, go ahead and request that we purchase it, and we will try. Can't guarantee, but we'll try to get it for you if we are able to do so. So I'll pause there to see if there are questions or comments. So we had a question. After linking Google Scholar to Ohio State Library account, if it does not automatically lead to the articles, does that mean I cannot access materials using Ohio State credential? Not necessarily. So it may be something that we do own that for some reason just didn't connect within the system. Or it could be, you could still request that material using Interlibrary Loan or using Article Express. So, if it's linked in Google Scholar and you don't see the link there, and this has happened to me many times where it'll come up and I'll click on a thing and it'll be like, find it at Ohio State. And then it'll take you through a page and maybe it's not actually there. You can still request that material through Interlibrary Loan or through Article Express. So even if it doesn't show up in your as being owned by Ohio State in a Google Scholar search, you can still use your Ohio State credentials to access it. It just might not be immediate access. So you might have to use Article Express and wait, 2 or 3 days to get that article. Again, don't let that be a roadblock. If it doesn't show up in that search, you can still go ahead and request it using library resources. Hopefully that answers that question, but if there are additional questions, please go ahead and ask them now. So I'll pause here to see if there are other questions or comments that folks have. Right, so in this last part, I wanted to highlight a few of the additional key services that we have here. And encourage you to think about these, take advantage of these as they are needed for you. The first one I want to mention, we've already talked about, and some folks have mentioned that they've used this already. But if you aren't familiar, Interlibrary Loan is what you can use to access material that is not owned by Ohio State. So that includes books, book chapters, articles. If you need it and it's not owned by Ohio State, you can't find it either through Google Scholar, or you can't find it by going through one of the research databases, or we just don't own that journal, for example. This is where you can put a request in and use Interlibrary Loan to request materials. If you request a book, it might take up to a week to get that book, because it'll have to be shipped from whatever library we find it at. If you request articles, those will often come within 1 to 2 days, sometimes 3 days, depending again. But if you request an article, they'll just email you the PDF of that article. So interlibrary loan is that tool that you can use and saying, I need this. I can't find it through the libraries. Can you get this for me? Interlibrary loan is the tool that we use to do that. So don't let that be a roadblock. If your initial search doesn't work, and if you're not sure if it's something that we own, you can put the interlibrary loan request in anyway. So I've done this myself. I've done this where I put in an interlibrary loan request and I will get an email back saying, we actually do own that. Here's where you can find it. It's okay. They know that it's not always easy to figure out whether or not we own something. So go ahead and put in that interlibrary loan request. And then if it is something that we own, they'll just tell you that it's something that we own and here's how to access it. If not, they'll go out and try to get it from somewhere else. So the specific request that you can use to find articles is called Our Article Express. And so this is the same link that you would use where you go to interlibrary loan, but it has a specific where I want to request this article. And it generally sends you a PDF of that article link where you can access the PDF within 1 to 3 days of your request. So what you'll have to do is once you put in your request, it'll ask for things like the title, the authors, what journal it's in, what year it was published, as much information as you can provide about that particular article. And again, this is what a tool that you'll use if you know what particular article you're looking for. This would not be a tool that you would want to use if you're just searching for a topic. It would want you to give specific information about the articles that you're looking for. But then it would go ahead and try to get those articles for you and send you them so you can electronically access them. Copyright services. I did want to highlight really quickly. Oh, go ahead, Tom. Go ahead.
I'm sorry for that last slide that you were just on. Is that also the Article Express? Is that also like only for articles that we don't have at Ohio State or can't access through our library, or is that what that's for? Okay.
That is what that's for. But again, if you do put a request in for an article that we do own, they'll just tell you that we own it and they'll tell you how to find it.
Okay.
So it's
cool.
totally fine. If you're not sure, if you've looked, if you've tried yourself and said, I can't seem to find this article through Ohio State, go ahead and put that request in.
Okay.
And then just let them tell you that we own it.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Yeah. It's totally fine. Like I said, I have had more than one time that I put in the request in and they've said, oh, by the way, we actually already do have this. Okay. That's fun. So yeah, but the purpose is for articles that you can't find through Ohio State. Or, I mean, it could be, if you could also use it, right? If, yeah, because otherwise you should be able to access the PDF. So yeah. So I think the option of choosing delivered to my office is an amazing service, but the office is closed. But if the office is closed, does the book get returned? I'm worried that I may not be able to receive the book as I was not in the office. Yes, so that's a good question there. So if they can't deliver it to your office, I'm assuming they would probably send you an email, but it does leave the risk that either it would be like stuck in a mailbox. So I've had that happen a couple of times where I've requested books and then not gone to campus for a couple of weeks. And I found the book was sitting there in my mailbox. And that does count against your checkout time. So if it's been sitting in your mailbox for 2 weeks, that's considered checked out to you. So you would want to be careful if you try to have it delivered to your office that it is going to be in a time. I mean, it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to be there right that moment. If they have a mailbox with that office, they'll deliver it to the mailbox for that office. But you will want to make sure that it is in a time period when you are going to be reasonably going to that office, to that mailbox in the next, couple of days. So briefly mention here, copyright services. As you are getting to the point where you are doing a thesis or a dissertation, and you may be needing to use copyrighted material, you have questions about whether or not you can use something. We have copyright services where you can ask questions. As a scholar yourself, as you write articles, as you write your dissertation, as you give presentations, you are the copyright owner of all of those things. And so you have rights yourself as a copyright owner. So if you have questions about either using copyrighted materials in your research or your own rights as a copyright holder, You can access our copyright services, and they have all kinds of support that they can provide around what might be the risk if I use this in my work. How do I go about getting permission from a copyright owner to use something? I'm getting ready to publish my first article. What are my options as an author in terms of controlling my own copyright? Those are questions that they can help you answer. So just keep that in mind as you're going through the process when you get to the point where you may be in a position where you are publishing or using published material. Someone earlier had mentioned in the chat that they use the Research Commons. So the Research Commons is both a place and it's a suite of services. So it's within the 18th Avenue Library on, I think it's the 3rd floor, is the Research Commons space. And this is an area where graduate and professional students are invited to go, where they have tables and rooms where you can go and work. But it's also a suite of services that is available to you as graduate and professional students that provide more advanced kind of support for research. So if you need help with things like data visualization and data management, if you need things about research impact, how do I track the impact of my research? Geospatial information systems. So if you wanted to share your research using a map, for example, and have a map that highlighted the cool locations related to your research, you could use that. Publishing repository. Where do I store my thesis or dissertation? How do I do that? How do I go about navigating the publishing process for the first time? Or digital humanities, any of those kinds of questions that more advanced graduate students would have about using data, finding data, managing their research impact, their scholarly presence. Those are all questions that the librarians in the Research Commons can help you with. So if you have any questions in any of those areas, please do make sure that you take a look. And my colleagues over in the Research Commons have vast amounts of knowledge on these topics, how to manage data, how to visualize data, all of those areas. So, keep those in mind as you're moving through the process if you might need those services. And I do want to highlight special collections and university archives. We have all kinds of great material that are in our special collections, from rare books and manuscripts, but we also have theater research, we have medical research, public policies archives, Highlander research articles is Slavic material, the Polar and Climate Research Center, and then I mentioned earlier the Cartoon Library and Museum. So really cool, interesting collections that we have here. And the special collections archivists are really open to and willing to work with scholars to identify the materials that might be relevant to you, to help you find access to those materials. A lot of the stuff you do have to go to the library to use, but a lot of the collections have been digitized as well and can be available online. I wrote a paper for my class last semester where I used a lot of the materials from the digitized version of the Lantern that's available through the special collections. And so that was like a fantastic tool to have available to use that. University archives, if you're doing any of your research has anything to do with the history of the university as well itself, the University Archives is a great place to go to find resources on the history of the university. Right, and then finally, getting help, right? And I think I put these in the chat as well. So I can put those. So those last two links in the chat. If you need help, you're not sure where to go. Again, I do recommend reaching out to your subject librarian, but if you just want general assistance, you're not sure where to go to get started, you can either ask, go to the Ask Us service, or if you're in the health sciences field, they have a special health sciences Ask Us link that's available to you. Ask us, really, let us know what kind of help you need, and what we will try to do what we can to help you. If there's a question that you ask your subject librarian that they don't know how to answer, they'll reach out to other subject librarians, if it's a resource that we don't have, we will try to get it for you. And, we can't do everything. There is limited budgets, even at a place like Ohio State. But we try as much as possible to get the resources that our patrons need. All right, so I'll pause here to see if there are questions, comments, or thoughts as we come to the end. I would love to share, anything that you felt that was really helpful today. I'd love to hear what you found was most valuable. If there's questions that you still have remaining, we have about 5 or 6 minutes left. So now's the time where you can open up any questions or comments that you would like to share. Wonderful, everything. Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm glad that you thought it was helpful. Yes. And again, the slideshow here. The slides are available using this link. So please go ahead and go back to those slides. If anything I went through fast, you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and continue using those. Share with other students that you think might find those helpful as well. Happy to make those available.
I thought it was really helpful to learn about the subject librarians. I wasn't aware of that, and also to know that I can have things delivered directly to my office is awesome.
Wonderful. That's great. Yeah. And definitely, reach out to the subject librarians. We like it when people ask us questions. That's why we became librarians. Definitely feel free to reach out to those people and let them know that you are interested in getting help. Wonderful, Tom. Yeah, and definitely, I'm glad that you keep coming to them and keep learning more every time. As I mentioned, it's really complicated. We have a very complicated library system. Library systems in general are complicated. It takes a lot of time to feel comfortable, doing library research. And so it's great that you continue learning each time and getting more familiar with resources. Wonderful. Thank you again. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and stop sharing. And I'll stick around for a few more minutes in case we have additional questions, but hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
I just want to say thanks again, Jane. The other presentations, I'm not trying to knock them at all. It's just literally you don't know what you don't know. And that's why, like, when I saw this advertised, it's like, oh my God, I'm going to go because I'm struggling I'm only in my second semester of my program. So but literally I was like, wait, how do I do this? I'm like trying to think back, to October, I think. So, this was really, really helpful. So thank you very, very, very much. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Have a good one.
You